Hi everyone. Today I want to pitch the game I'm actually going to be making in those devlogs. So introducing Marsozoic, a xeno-paleontology game of excavation and deduction. So first I want to talk about inspirations for the game, because that's kind of going to make the concept clearer, I think. So I'm a huge fan of investigation and deduction games. Especially right now, it really feels like we're in a total renewal and like a new golden age of the genre, with a lot of really amazing deduction games coming out and the emergence of the Metroidvania concept. And for a lot of those more recent games, they take some clear inspirations from Return of the Obra Dinn, which to me is an absolute king of the genre and one of my favorite games of all time. Quick side note, I think 2018 and 2019 were a really blessed time in video games, with Return of the Obra Dinn and Outer Wilds both coming out. So that's two completely groundbreaking masterpieces in just 2 years' time. But to get back to Obra Dinn specifically, that game felt really special because of how completely it trusts the player and the player's intelligence. Like, you have all the necessary info available to you freely, and you just have to put it together. And that's obviously a pretty radical design choice. To me, Obra Dinn is also an amazing lesson in terms of game scope, because the whole game is made by a single person, Lucas Pope, and because of that, he knew to keep the scope really tight to achieve his vision. Like, the game does exactly what it sets off to do, and only that. Like, it has no fluff. And Pope also knew to turn scope limitations into like strong aesthetic choices, like the monochrome color palette and the still tableaus without any animations. Those are choices that give the game this really strong identifiable style, but also choices that save on complexity and, dev time and cost. So in all of those aspects, Obra Dinn is a really huge inspiration for me. It's probably the main inspiration behind the game I'm setting out to make. And really, like, Lucas Pope is one of my heroes in game dev, and I find his work and career just really inspiring. So that's for the game side of the inspirations. And the other side of the inspirations is that I really love dinosaurs and paleontology. I was one of those kids that was just obsessed with dinosaurs, and that just never really left me. Like, I wore one of my dinosaur fossil shirts today on purpose. I have a few of those. So yeah, I think paleontology is really cool, and I love deduction games, and that's what initially, a bit more than a year ago, gave me the idea. What if I made a game about paleontology and fossils? Because I felt like I had never really seen a game like that, like on that theme about excavating fossils, etc. And that felt to me like it had a lot of potential. And that's how the idea for Marsozoic was born, a game where you play as a xeno-paleontologist on Mars, where you excavate the fossils of ancient Martian creatures, and then by examining and comparing the fossils and by cross-referencing information, you can put the skeleton together and you deduce how the creature lived, you would discover what it looked like, and like that you slowly reconstitute an entire fictional ancient Martian ecosystem. So the name obviously is a combination of Mars and Mesozoic, which is the age during which the dinosaurs ruled on Earth. Not necessarily the final name, but I like it for now. So let's talk game design. In practice, I want the game to have two phases. First off, a very hands-on, like really tactile feeling excavation phase, where you have to actually find the fossils on a small area of Mars's surface and kind of carefully dig them out. I'm thinking, because you're on Mars, you only have limited oxygen, and so limited time for each exploration, and to actually dig out whatever you find. Like, you have a variety of tools which dig in different ways with various levels of speed and precision, and in that limited time you have to find the fossils that interest you and dig them out without destroying them. So side note, when I mentioned this concept to a friend of mine, she went, oh, kind of like in Spectrobes, and I had never heard of Spectrobes in my life. So it's an old JRPG series that was essentially Disney trying to develop their own Pokemon franchise. And in those games, you'd get creatures by excavating their fossils. And so out of nowhere, my friend really dropped this amazing reference on me. Like, each Spectrobe game had their own excavation minigame with interesting mechanics, and the reviews for the games generally seem to agree that the excavation was kind of the most interesting part of those games. So we'll definitely be looking at that for inspiration. So the main challenges for this part of the game will be about ensuring that the excavating feels fun and like tactile and not repetitive. So there's a bunch of questions to solve, like, do you explore the same environment each time? Or are the environment and the fossils placements kind of procedurally generated every time you explore? Things like that I need to figure out. Here are some really, really early technical tests I made a few months ago, like the simple generation of a bone bed and some really basic digging and some like first look into like terrain generation, things like that, but it's really early. And then the second phase of the game is a lot more about analysis and deduction, and I want that to be the actual core of the game. So in that phase, you're back at your lab and you're examining and sorting the fossils you found on the field. I made some simple mock-ups for different aspects of this. So these are really, really early mock-ups. None of this is meant to reflect the final look of the game. It's just to kind of flesh out the idea. And so you're in your lab, and here you can inspect the fossils you found, and you have a little library of documents that you can refer to with simple information like a map of Mars and simple geology and paleontology concepts, the anatomy of animals on Earth and how they behave, some fictional concepts, of course, for the needs of the game, things like that. Here are some more like really early mock-ups of what those reference documents in the lab may kind of be like. So in your lab, you can manipulate the fossils, examine them closely, and cross-reference information from the reference documents. You take notes, you can link different concepts, and maybe with a kind of map system with strings. You can perform some simple tests on the fossils, like X-raying them, for example. Like if a bone is hollow or not, that tells you something about its function and the creature it belonged to. And so your goal is to put fossils you found together to reconstitute the skeleton of those ancient Mars creatures and to deduce various aspects of how they actually lived to fill out the information sheet. Like what environment did they live in, what senses did they use, what did they eat, and you deduce all of that from the fossils you find. You fill each creature's sheet by pulling out concepts directly from the reference documents, so that's obviously a mechanic that's directly inspired from the Golden Idol games. If you've played them, you'll recognize this immediately. You have holes of different colors, and you have to fill them with the proper word of that color. Here's a bunch of examples of like categories of words that I'm preparing to be part of that system. And then when you have reconstituted the skeleton and filled in the creature's information sheet, the game validates your answers and you get rewarded with a cool illustration of the creature when it was alive. That concept is inspired by In Other Waters, which is a beautiful, like minimalistic, relaxing game about exploring an alien planet. Everything in the game is described in text, so you use your imagination. But if you study a given life form enough, then you get rewarded with an illustration of the creature. I thought that was really cool, and I think it would work well here because, as you deduce things, you will kind of get an idea in your head of what the creature was like, and then you actually see it and see how close you were in your head. And ideally, as you validate the information for certain creatures, it should help you figure out other creatures as well. Like, oh, maybe this was the predator that fed on this one. Or, oh, it looked like this creature evolved from this other one, so maybe the diet is actually similar, things like that. So for this phase, there are two massively important aspects that I need to actually test for. One, of course, is it fun? I don't want the game to feel scholarly. It's not meant to be an educational game. So I need to confirm that this mechanic to cross-reference documentation and analyzing fossils actually feels fun and interesting. And the second one is how difficult should it actually be? Because I'm going to need to playtest a bunch to confirm whether players can actually make the deductions that I expect them to make. I'm going to be designing the creatures, so of course it will actually be hard for me to judge whether something's a logical deduction to make or whether I'm asking the players to make like a huge logic leap. So that aspect for sure is a common problem for puzzle game designers, so I can for sure do some research into how they approach that, but I know for certain that obviously testing is going to be a big part of it. And there you have it, that's what the gameplay loop should ideally look like. You excavate fossils, you examine them back at the lab, and that way you answer some questions. That gives you some hints as to what fossils you would like to look for next. You bring those back, they answer more questions, and they open more leads, and you follow them by looking for other fossils, etc. That's the entire game concept. I'll be making the game in Godot, because it's an engine I really love. I've used it in the past. For the last 2 years, I've participated in the GMTK Game Jam with a team of 5 other people. I participated as a programmer, and both times we've made a small game in Godot. You can check them out on my itch.io page if you're interested. I'll put it in the description. So my intention at the moment is to make as much of the game as possible by myself, to kind of get as far as I can on my own, and hire freelance artists for key high-quality assets that I can't do myself at a level I'm happy with. For example, beautiful live creature illustrations or the music, because I've never made music in my life. The reason why I want to do as much as possible by myself isn't to be like precious about being a solo dev or whatever. It's for 2 reasons. The first one is because as a AAA dev, I've always been part of a very large team. And so I kind of just want to try like the opposite of that for a while. I love learning new things and figuring things out. And so I just kind of want to try and see how far I can get. I know I'm going to learn a ton. I'll try to be smart about decisions to try and do things myself versus actually hiring pros who can do specific things better and faster than me. Like keep a good balance of those in terms of money and time. The other reason why I would like to do as much of it alone as possible is to try and really keep the scope small and manageable. So the kind of design by constraints thing that I mentioned earlier with Oberdin. And that way that also keeps costs low. Because as long as I'm pretty much the only person working on the game, then the game's budget is mostly my living expenses. The industry is really rough right now. You've probably heard about it. There's lots of layoffs, there's studios closing. It's pretty awful, and so the industry in general has gotten a lot more risk averse. And so if, like, let's say development is going well and after a year or so I need to look for a publisher, my intuition, and I might be wrong in this, but my intuition is that it's going to be easier to go to a publisher with a small project that only needs a really small budget. It feels to me like from a publisher's point of view right now, it's going to be less risky to be like, okay, I'm working alone on this really like small niche game, but I just need a little bit of funding to see it through, rather than, you know, arriving with a bigger team and a really ambitious project that needs a lot more of an investment. So essentially, like, keeping the costs low to keep the potential risk to an investor low. So of course this is a bit of an oversimplification, and I might be wrong in this. I have like never actually pitched to a publisher before, but I do think that keeping the budget low and the scope reasonable is a good plan in any case. So we're gonna try and do that. So yeah, that's the project. I hope you liked the concept. I'd love to know if this is a kind of game that you'd find interesting in the comments. This is actually the first kind of big test for this game concept. It's the first time I'm pitching it to any kind of broader audience. So I'd be really interested in your feedback and your thoughts about it. I wanted to say a really huge thank you to everyone who watched my first video and for all the lovely, encouraging comments. It was totally unexpected because it was just such a short video just of me talking to the camera. But apparently the YouTube algorithm decided to just blast it onto people's homepages, and before I knew it, there were a lot of super encouraging comments. So thank you very, very much. That's really encouraging. It makes me want to really commit and put some efforts into those devlogs. I don't know how often I'll actually be able to make these kind of devlogs. I'll do my best to keep it somewhat regular, but of course I don't want to take away too much from actual dev time. But next time I'll go over how I designed the very first prototype creature for the game. So the creature concept, the skeleton, and the fossils. Thank you very, very much, and see you next time.